Today, we're diving into how Italian wine has found a home and voice in California through one of the most iconic Italian wine restaurants, A16. So, joining me is Master Sommelier Brian Cronin, who's played a pivotal role in shaping Italian wine culture through his work with the A16 group. The focus for today's episode and what we're excited to really take away and learn from you, Brian, are number one, how restaurants act as cultural gateways for Italian wine, but really wine in general, right? And like you said, hospitality is your background and focus. Number two, the evolution of Italian wine culture in the Bay Area, in the West Coast in general. And finally, what are some of the opportunities today for Italian wine in the West Coast and the Bay Area?
Hello, welcome to Masterclass US Wine Market with me, your host, Juliana Colangelo. This show has been designed to demystify the U.S. market for Italian wineries through interviews with experts in sales and distribution, social media, communications, and so much more. We will quiz each of our esteemed guests in every episode to solidify the lessons that we've learned from the episode. So sharpen your pencils, get out your notebooks, and join us this week to learn more about the U.S. market.
Hello, welcome back to Masterclass US Wine Market on the Italian Wine Podcast. Today we're diving into how Italian wine has found a home and voice in California through one of the most iconic Italian wine restaurants, A16. So joining me is Master Sommelier Brian Cronin, who's played a pivotal role in shaping Italian wine culture through his work with the A16 group. So together we're going to talk about how on-premise can be utilized more effectively and efficiently as a gateway for Italian wine education for today's consumer, and more specifically, what's happening in Italian wine and what's trending in California and the Bay Area specifically, where the A16 restaurant group is located. Brian, welcome to the show. It's so much fun to have you here. I love having friends on the podcast.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. And thanks for that awesome introduction. I will say, just as a wonderful correction, but not really a correction, I had loved Italian wine before, but my Italian love, or I should say the amount of Italian wine, my love grew through the tutelage and just being around Shelley Lindgren, who I think has even more shaped the face of the Italian wine that most of people weren't talking about, like Piemonte, Tuscany and stuff. She took care of like the rest of Italy outside of that. And that's where my love. So thanks for introducing me as that. But I think I'll give one more totem above myself and a couple more as her. So thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we love Shelley, and we've had her on the podcast and at Wine to Wine, so our listeners should be familiar with Shelley and her incredible work and everything she's done for Italian wine. But for those of our listeners who might not know you as well, Brian, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you came to be working in this crazy world of wine we're in?
Well, wine is a career that I think, like a lot of people, I didn't think I would ever end up in. When I was little, I wanted to be an archaeologist, a massive love of history and science through my aunt, who was a forensic biologist. And then I just fell in love with all of those things. And I was working in restaurants in high school and the beginning of college, but I had gotten accepted into Berklee School of Music. So I thought I was going to be a musician, then realized I actually think I wanted to make money and I could always love playing. So I went to school to become a doctor. And in the middle of the beginning of undergrad, restaurants and things, I was working at a restaurant where the GM really loved wine. And I would listen to him talk to people, wine vendors, wine salespeople about wine. And I would just listen in and just really take in everything. And I just kind of started falling in love with the information of it, the history, chemistry, geology, geography. I mean, you name it, you can talk about it, including religion, which we don't have to talk about that right now, but plays a big role into it. But then one day they slid a glass over to me, and I remember previously he would just taste them on different wines, and I remember them talking about a Syrah once, and they were smelling the wine, and he was like, "I think this is peppery." Well, fast forward to however many months later, it could have been a year later. I don't know. When you're 18, 1 month could be a year. I smelled it, and I'm like, "This smells like pepper. Is this a Syrah?" And somehow it just, everything kind of stuck with me. And I kept reading books, taking notes, and met somebody a year or so later who told me about the Master Sommelier. And I was like, "Ooh, what is this?" They connected me with somebody who connected me with somebody who connected me with Madeleine Trefan, one of the best sommeliers ever, and an amazing mentor. And I talked to her and she said, "Well, we're offering an introductory course for the Master Sommelier coming up in November." And I said, "Ooh, yay, I'll be 21. I signed up for that. And yeah, and things really fell into place. That's where I met Charlie Trotter. And a couple months later, he called me up and I moved from North Carolina to be the assistant sommelier at Charlie Trotter's a little bit after I turned 21. And that really put me on a rocket ship to the future and learning under and meeting so many amazing people that have, I think, molded me and shaped me to kind of where I am today, which is still very much wine driven, but I think more so
Right.
hospitality driven just from all the years.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So very an early start into the industry, and I'm sure you've seen such a quite an evolution over the years you've been working in wine. But today we'll focus more on the work you've done with Italian wine, now working with Shelley, of course, and prior roles as well. And the focus for today's episode and what we're excited to really take away and learn from you, Brian, are number one, how restaurants act as cultural gateways for Italian wine, but really wine in general, right? And like you said, hospitality is your background and focus. So you can really, I think, help us understand that concept really well. Number two, the evolution of Italian wine culture in the Bay Area, in the West Coast in general. And finally, what are some of the opportunities today for Italian wine in the West Coast and the Bay Area? So let's just get started first about, what first drew you to Italian wine as a sommelier. What were your first interest in Italian wine, and how have those evolved over the years?
Well, my first foray into Italian wine, it was a little bit, I won't say later on in my career. I was still pretty early on as a sommelier. And that was primarily with the wines of Piemonte. I think a lot of people, back then, I mean, this was the mid 90s. A lot of people were focused more on Tuscany. Mine was Piemonte. I will, though, say like one thing that got me starting to think about Italy was an experience I had. Shh, hold your ears if you're the police. I was 18 and I went to a wine tasting when I still lived in Raleigh,
Watch
North
out.
Carolina. And it was a gentleman who passed away some years ago, but I think really influential in getting Brunello out there in the United States was a gentleman that worked for Bonfi named Dr. Lucio Sore, and really amazing influence as far as the work that he did in enology, but how he presented it. And he talked about the amazingness of the vines in Brunello, including their growth of like Syrah and things long before people were talking about that. So that was my first one. But my real deep dive happened with Piemonte and Barbaresco. It's the only way that trickle down theory worked. It was like, wow, I started off with this really high end wine because Charlie Trotter was a big fan and friend of Angelo Gaia, and we brought him in for the 10th anniversary of Trotters. And I had to organize the wines along with my boss Joe Spellman, and we organized wines for Angelo Gaia, his Barbaresco and Barolo going back to 1961.
Incredible.
For this lunch and dinner, and that kind of made me go, ooh, this is amazing. What else can Nebbiolo do? And it started from there. And then it kind of jumped to some of the, I'll say, classic regions. Like I hit Amarone after that because the availability of being able to buy older Amarone it's easy. It still is relatively easy for old vintages and things. And then it jumped to Tuscany. So that was kind of the beginnings of my background with Italy. I will say the classics, but it was a dive into, I don't want to use the word best, but somebody who's one of the most like influential people in one area, but how they love the entire area, not just their own wines. And it was really learning through that. And that's why I think Angelo is really incredible, because he falls in love with grapes like they're people and really wants to see the whole aspect of what that grape can do in a region and not just with one winery.
Right. So you got that really incredible perspective early on the Italian wine category with some of the greats, some of the most iconic wines and regions. How did you see working in restaurants and hospitality? How have you seen the role of the restaurant really open people's eyes to Italian wine from the consumer perspective? Like, what role do you think the on-premise, the sommelier can play when it comes to really educating the consumer on these wines?
I think one of the biggest things, and I think why I'm where I am with A16 in my current position, a lot of it has to do with the overall food and the culture. When we look at the growth, and this is like an entire 12 different podcasts too, the growth of Italian food in the United States, I think we can look at back the classic like Godfather-esque style red and white check or white tablecloth restaurants that you drank Amarone, you had Brunello, or you had Barolo or Chianti or something. But, it was very straightforward wines with American style Italian food that was catered to us. Big pastas, meats, ossobuco, stuff like that. And that helped, I think, showcase those wines. But the role in the past few decades of the regional restaurants, people just doing Sicilian food, or people really focusing on Piemontese food with great restaurants like, say, even Spinace. I just moved from Seattle. Spinace focusing on 100% Piemontese and having a primarily Piemontese list. Or Tuscan restaurants focusing on, grilled meats and things with Tuscan wines. And here with, A16 and Shelley's focus on Campanian food and stuff that goes all the way from Campania to Basilicata and Puglia, and then getting into Sicily too. So the cuisine plays a big role in, I say, education, but also how you can deliver new wines to people. Because if people are open to saying, oh, awesome, I want to have Campanian food and Neapolitan pizza, and then you start delivering Campanian wine, the openness is more natural, and people go, ooh, what is this? Instead of, well, we got that here too, but do you have a Chardonnay by the glass? It's like, no, we don't have a Chardonnay, but we have dot, dot, dot.
Right.
So that, I think, is the beginning of it. And a huge role is the food and the deliverance, as opposed to just the sommelier going. And I love educating and I love teaching. I think the role of the sommelier on the floor is more introduction than educating, because it puts it in a light of, I'm trying to give to your experience instead of profess to you what you should be having, if that makes sense.
Right. No, I'm trying to enhance your evening, your experience here at the restaurant by introducing you to something new and giving you something that will work with the food, but that will also fit your palate and what you're asking for.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Brian, you've worked at international, or let's say kind of classic restaurants like the Charlie Trotter group, and then more now with A16 and Shelley, obviously a very focused program in Italy. Like, how do you change your approach as a sommelier on the floor working at a more generalist international, like American restaurant versus something specialized like A16?
Well, first, I think a really wonderful thing about the approach is 90% of the customers now, maybe a little bit less, but a very big majority that come in have heard something about it and know that they're probably not going to get the norm. So my ability and confidence / comfort in going, well, you're having, tripa napoletana, which, you're ordering that right away, and usually it's off the beaten path for most people. And then you can turn around and say, I have an amazing Aglianico. We're actually pouring two Aglianicos by the glass, one a classic Del Votore, which has certain style. And then here we have another one like Grafalco, for instance, which has this freshness and vibrance. And people go, oh, wow. Whereas the day before, if you thought that they would say the words Aglianico, they wouldn't. So just the comfort in being able to know that I can talk about this and people are going to be open to it just because they walked in the door.
Yeah, and by the way, the tripa at A16 is one of the best I've ever had. So you have not had it.
Don't think about the word tripe when you walk in the door. Just order the food and just go, oh, this is really yummy, and forget what you're eating.
Sounds nicer too when you say tripa,
Yeah.
right? The tripe.
Totally. But I think that's one of the things that helps. And just a very quick aside, when you go to the beginnings of the restaurant and people coming in and really were constantly asking for, like, I'd like a Chardonnay. Well, we don't have a Chardonnay. Oh, really? And it's kind of almost a complaint and negativity. But then you turn them onto something. And this is the part where education does come into play. But it's more of like, here are the offerings and let me have you try this. If you don't like it, I'll find something that'll work with you. To those same people a couple of years down the road, like literally the same customer years down the road, we're walking in the door going, okay, which Falanghina by the glass should I order?
I love that. Yeah.
And that is something that has happened because of, I think, not only what Shelley has done, but the regional Italian restaurants where people really can focus on having something different and know that they open their mind just because of the door that they walked through, instead of I walked into a steakhouse thinking I need to get Cabernet Chardonnay or Big Burl or whatever. They walk in the door with something more regional and they feel more liberated and open to an experience as opposed to just picking a go-to.
Yeah, and I think that especially when you're in California and you're in the backyard of Napa and Sonoma, where there's so many great regional and local wines, to have built this culture on Italian wine so strongly is so incredible. And I'm curious, Brian, you worked for Shelley in her restaurants a decade ago, and now you're back here in 2025. How has the experience and the wine program at A16 evolved over the last 10 years? Like, what are you finding consumers really gravitating towards right now when they walk into the restaurant in terms of Italian wine?
I definitely see, even more so than before, people's love of Sicily and Etna. I mean, it's going
Hmm.
through such a massive popularity growth. I mean, even when my people like, oh my God, I would love to have a great Etna Bianco, or I want to have. Do y'all have any Norello Mascalese? Yeah, and high five for asking that question to me. Yes, we do. Or do you have, a Cersuolo di Vittoria? Because I had a great one, or I had a great Frappato, or people just saying, I want something from Sicily because I heard it's really wonderful. So Sicily is growing, and I don't know if you can attribute that to not only periodicals, magazines, online, but even, oh, my brain just blanked. What's the series on HBO that one of
White
them?
Lotus.
Yeah, White Lotus. I
The
mean,
White Lotus effect. We've talked about that a lot.
big time. I mean, the White Lotus effect. I know that part of that, when it was filmed in Sicily, and some very, well-known wineries were a part of that. And that makes people jump on board, which, you know what? I will never complain about any type of travel movie that gets people wanting to try local stuff, because it gets people, again, it's not just, we're a restaurant that's outside of the comfort zone. It just gets people out of their own wine comfort zone. And
And drinking something different and exploring. Absolutely.
yeah.
How do you think the role of the sommelier has changed in the last 10 years as well, in terms of how the role that the sommelier plays on the floor for the consumer?
Oh, that's a big question. It's also kind of a it's a loaded question on some of it, my, I guess, overall what the sommelier is and my personal beliefs on it. I think at the end of the day, my definition of a sommelier is somebody who's there to assess a guest's needs and exceed their expectations, or try to. And it doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't have to do with wine, but it's really about the hospitality aspect first, and trying to give them what they desire. And that falls in line with also finding out what they desire, because sometimes, especially when it comes to wine, people might not know what they desire. People know what kind of clothes they like most of the time, they know what kind of music they like, furniture, art. For some reason, wine is still one of the things where they feel like they need approval for what they like.
Interesting.
And that's not everybody, but a lot of people do it. For the role of the sommelier, we're not there to say, this is good, better, best, or you shouldn't be having this. It should be, let me guide you and find out what would be the best for you. And I think sommelier is falling in line with that, or that's a wrong thing to say, falling in line, but really, it comes down to the hospitality. I would rather hire a sommelier that really loves and takes care of people and needs to learn a lot about wine, than somebody that already knows a lot about wine but is less inclined to really want to take care of the guest and say, the biggest thing that I hear is, I want to be an educator. And I'm like, well, that's not taking care of people. That's
Right.
giving them the information. And I think the role of sommelier is, yes, you have all the information that you have at your fingertips, but more so, I know the wine list like I know my own face, and I know the food like I know my face, and I can help the guest and guide them through their experience and make it as great and be as involved as they want, or as least involved as they want, and know that that's what they want. And to me, that's the importance of the sommelier. And the information is important, and the knowledge is important, but I think the care and service is paramount. And when you have all, like, a great palette of
Absolutely.
wines, and when you select the wines for your guests, and the appropriateness of the food and the menu, as well as the demographic and what is needed. For instance, most of our wines are all Italian, and we do have some California wines. Some of them are, if you want to call it Calatal or California Italian varieties, and then some classics in San Francisco and in Oakland Rockridge. But we also just opened up in Napa. So we also have wines that are, quote unquote, friends of the restaurant. And does our food technically go well with, some mountain Cabernets that are stunning, but may not be perfect with the food? No, but a lot of people might want to have that. And you know what? We're going to give that to them, because that's what they're experiencing and that's what they want. So I think the sommelier's role should also be knowing, this is what the people want. And even though I love Gruner Veltliner, I'm not going to put 40 Gruner Veltliners on the wine list, because it just ain't going to work.
Right. Absolutely. And, we've talked about Etna, and that's such a true success story for Italian wine in a region, really gaining such incredible prominence, but also cultural relevance. Do you see anything else, like maybe coming up on the surface as a new trend in Italian wine among guests at A16?
As far as a new trend, I think Campania is still on the edge of a precipice for, like, really diving in. I think it's going to explode more so. And I see it from our restaurants, but then you see it also, I think, with, I was just talking to one of our our distributors yesterday that focuses 90% on Italian wines was in town with this amazing winery called Marco Carbonetti. They're actually in Lazio, so they make, very specific styles for there. And, here's a grape called Bellone, and you're not going to see Bellone being poured by the
Nope.
glass anywhere in the United States. But when you look at other grapes that people have known for a long time, like Aglianico, for instance, and you had great producers that have been producing it, like, Master Borodino and stuff. But then you have younger generations that are taking that grape and still learning and taking it a step further in many ways, like a Grafalco. And I think that's a grape that is like right on the verge of really blowing up. And
Okay.
if you had said 20 years ago, people like Barolo and Barbaresco, but would you think that you'd see as much Nebbiolo out there as you do now 20 years ago? And I think people in Piemonte, they were still learning how to make Nebbiolo. Imagine 20 years ago having a very fresh style of Langhe Rosso that's all Nebbiolo that you can drink on release, but it's not too fruity. It still has the texture and character of Nebbiolo. I mean, I couldn't have ever imagined that 20 years ago. Even 10 years ago as a consistency, other than finding a couple producers. And I'm not saying that Aglianico is going to be suddenly the biggest rage out there, but I think what is being done with it on a grape level and how it can showcase itself in many different ways, but also on the single vineyard level and the aspect of its regionality, even within Campania, is incredible. And the more people that see that, the more they go, oh my God, this is so cool. It makes it.
I think the value, right, too, in Southern Italian wine is unmatched in terms of what the price to quality ratio that you're getting also. I guess we've been on the verge of a recession for the last, decade now, but, it maybe perhaps feels more real now than ever before, at least the rising cost of everything. People are looking for values too. And I think, Southern Italy, Aglianico, you're getting for beautiful, age-worthy, rich, structured, dense, incredible wines, incredible value.
Agree. And, and all of the above is there. And you can get it even from one winery, you can get it at one price point, and then you can also jump up 3 or 4 price points. People that are doing their quote unquote, their estate wine, or people that are doing it in just a young, fresh style with no either, I say wood, but no like large format aging or anything like that, to your tiniest, oldest vine, single vineyard expression of it, and they're all equally enjoyable. And you have so many amazing whites that are coming from the area too, so that helps balance it out. So, Campania is your friend, but don't put this on Instagram because this will make everybody start to love it and it'll become expensive again. Oops, did I say that? No.
We gotta keep the secret to ourselves.
Totally. I mean, look, I wonder if the wines of Etna would have taken off so fast if social media wasn't the same.
Very interesting question for sure. Yeah, and I doubt it, in a sense. So it's a whole new world out there with
That's a whole nother series of podcasts on the influence of social media on particular wine regions. Cornas.
part two to be continued
Yeah.
because we're coming to time, Brian. I know we could
Oh.
chat forever. So we'll do our rapid fire quiz we do at the end of every episode. If you can do your best to answer in 1 or 2 sentences. So question number 1, what is your number 1 tip for mastering the U.S. wine market?
Mastering the US wine market, get out of it. No, listen to what consumers are saying, but also look at what can be achieved. I think it's a fine line, but it's definitely something that you can grow with. I mean, I'll make this quick. All the news about what alcohol affects for your body, they've been doing this study for decades, and people are still living to be 110, and they're still living to be 50, and everywhere in between. And beverages will always be there. So stay true and make sure that you keep following what you're doing, but also listen to the trends. And if you need to make money as a beverage program, you listen to what's happening and you try to accommodate, but still stay true to what you are.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. It's like in this day and age, things can be so absolute or black and white. It's like accept the gray areas, be flexible, adapt, and be willing to try new things and change too, and try something different.
Yeah, you said that so much better than I did. Thank you.
I try to spit it back and summarize it. Question number 2, what is something you might have told your quite younger, 18-year-old self about selling wine in the U.S.?
Wow, you don't know everything yet, so open up your ears and your mouth.
All right. I like that one. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. That's a good one. And finally, what is your favorite travel hack when you're out there on the road traveling for work, as many of us do?
As you'll appreciate it, we've discussed sometimes, but as somebody who used to travel between 100 and 150 miles, 1,000 miles a year for work, there's always an important part in my suitcase for my running shoes, my shorts, and my running shirt. And when I land, I try to get in miles, or that evening, I try to get in miles. It's a good physical reset, it's a good mental reset, and it helps prevent jet lag. And it also makes you feel good with the amount of food and wine that we kind of have to consume. Even though it's not a lot, it doesn't mean you're overindulging. But with so many dinners and so many things that you have to taste, it's emotionally exhausting, I think, more than physically exhausting. And a good run is a reset. And if you don't run, I think the best hack is just going to be do something for yourself, even if it's 30 minutes, go for a long walk, go
Oh,
outside,
yeah.
read a book, do something like that that gives yourself a part of a normal day. And we can always find that time. It's just making yourself do it.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that's a really, really important advice and something I try to follow as much as possible too. And when I travel. Well, Brian, thank you again for being on the podcast with me today. It was so much fun to have you here. How can our listeners follow along with what you're up to?
The biggest thing, I'm not a massive, I'm on all over different social medias. My Instagram, though, is Running Wine Guy. And I tend to post a lot about running, less so about running right now, but more running is happening. I post a lot about wine, and then kind of my love of photography, which kind of incorporates wine. But there's also a lot of stuff about A16 and what we're doing because, now that I'm here, like we had the Carpenetti family here last night and then tonight. So, and then we have more next week. So, and then I'll see you in a few months too, which you'll see on Instagram with, Lambrusco and oysters. So if you're in San Francisco or the Bay Area in November, come have come be shellfish with us.
Thank you so much, Brian. It was so great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Jules. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. Stay tuned each week for new episodes of Masterclass US Wine Market with me, Juliana Colangelo. And remember, if you've enjoyed today's show, hit the like and follow buttons wherever you get your podcasts.